A black woman, Maya Thompson, is humiliated and harassed at a busy restaurant simply for being herself, trapped in a moment of blatant injustice. The group of men, led by the smug and arrogant Greg, escalate their mockery, turning the cozy bistro into a stage for cruelty. But just as the situation feels hopeless, her husband, FBI agent David Thompson, arrives and calmly asserts authority, shifting the balance entirely. And just wait to see how their confrontation unfolds, restoring dignity and proving that courage and justice can triumph even in the tensest moments. It was a busy Friday night at the Oakwood Bistro, the kind of place where warm lighting bounced softly off polished wood panels and the aroma of roasted coffee and fresh bread mingled in the air. The restaurant was alive with chatter, clinking glasses, and the quiet hiss of waitstaff balancing trays on their arms. Maya Thompson sat at a corner table near the window, the soft glow of a table lamp highlighting the sharp lines of her elegant features. Her posture was poised, her hands steady as she opened her laptop. Emails, reports, and deadlines waited for her attention. Work she had brought home, despite the end of another long week. She had planned this evening as a quiet moment to catch up, a rare chance to merge her professional and personal space under the comforting hum of the restaurant. For the first few minutes, Maya allowed herself to breathe in the calmness. Outside, city lights flickered against the evening sky, and the faint murmur of traffic provided a rhythm beneath the cozy din inside. But as she typed the opening lines of an overdue project, she became aware of eyes on her, not curious glances, but scrutinizing stares from a group of men at a nearby table. At first, she tried to ignore them, focusing on the soft glow of her screen and the gentle clatter of utensils from tables around her. Then came the subtle shifts, the quiet laughter that didn't belong to the ambient chatter. She felt it, the unmistakable weight of their attention, like a cold hand brushing against her shoulders. The men's stares sharpened, their whispers growing louder, low enough to be unsettling but not immediately confrontational. Maya's fingers paused over the keyboard as her intuition told her this was no ordinary curiosity. The leader of the group, a broad-shouldered man with a sharp jawline and a smug expression, leaned forward. His name, she learned shortly, was Greg. His voice carried a mocking tone as he said, "Maybe you should go back to where you belong." The words, casually cruel and deliberate, landed like stones thrown into a calm pond. Shock rippled through Maya first. Her mind froze for a split second, not from fear, but from disbelief. In a modern, bustling city, in a restaurant full of people, such words were being directed at her simply for being herself. Her shock quickly curdled into anger, a low, simmering fire that spread from her chest to her fingertips. How could people still act with such blatant disrespect and disregard for another human being? How could they think it was acceptable to target someone for their identity in a public space? She clenched her jaw slightly, feeling the tension ripple through her body, and took a slow, steadying breath. She had faced prejudice before, in various forms, but the brazen confidence of this group's cruelty struck a nerve. Maya tried to dismiss them, returning her focus to her laptop, hoping that ignoring them might diffuse the situation. But the attempt only seemed to fuel their behavior. The whispers grew into louder, pointed remarks, each sentence a reminder that she was being singled out for who she was. Their eyes tracked her movements with a predatory curiosity, and Greg's occasional smirk made her blood boil. It was deliberate, orchestrated, and entirely meant to provoke a reaction. Around her, the restaurant continued its usual rhythm, but the space between Maya and the group seemed to shrink with every passing second. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, no longer typing, but clenching and unclenching with the tension of suppressed rage. She wanted to rise, to confront, to assert that their behavior was unacceptable, but she knew that any sudden move could escalate matters before she had a clear plan. Her anger sharpened into resolve, a mental preparation for whatever came next. She refused to let their actions define the evening, but the injustice of it, the audacity of such brazen disrespect, ignited a spark that would not be ignored. Every glance from Greg, every snicker from his companions, served to fan that spark. The restaurant's warm glow felt almost suffocating now, enclosing her in a spotlight of scrutiny she hadn't asked for. Anger coursed through her veins, a fierce awareness that this moment was not just an isolated incident, it was a reflection of the ongoing struggle to be seen, respected, and treated fairly. Maya inhaled deeply again, steadying herself. She would not crumble under their gaze. The fire of anger was only the first step, the initial surge of emotion that would prepare her for the confrontation ahead and for the arrival of someone who would change the course of this evening entirely. The laughter grew sharper, cutting through the gentle hum of the Oakwood bistro like shards of glass. Maya's chest tightened. She could feel the sting of humiliation spreading through her, quiet but relentless, as the men's mockery became bolder, more public. Every small motion she made, a hand adjusting her laptop, the simple act of reaching for her glass, was now met with exaggerated laughter or a whispered comment she couldn't quite hear but could feel in her bones. It wasn't just noise anymore. It was a performance, staged at her expense. She tried to keep her posture straight, her chin high, but the weight of so many eyes, curious, unsure, judgmental, began to press down on her shoulders. The restaurant's warm air suddenly felt heavy, as though all the oxygen had been drained from her corner. A bead of sweat traced down her temple, not from heat, but from the strain of keeping her composure while the world seemed to shrink into a single, suffocating spotlight. Maya glanced toward the bar where two waiters stood, whispering to each other in uncertainty. Their eyes darted between her and the group, their hesitation clear. For a moment, one of them looked ready to intervene, but then turned away when Greg threw a glance in his direction, a look sharp enough to freeze him in place. The staff's silence hurt more than the men's taunts. It wasn't just about what was being said, it was about what wasn't being done. No one stepped in, no one spoke up, and that silence, the quiet acceptance of cruelty, cut deeper than any insult could. Maya raised a hand slightly, hoping to signal the waiter, but her voice caught in her throat. When she finally managed to speak, her words came out softer than she intended, almost trembling. "Excuse me, could I speak to the manager?" The waiter hesitated again, nodded weakly, and walked away without meeting her eyes. The faint sound of the men's laughter followed him, echoing like a taunt. The bistro, once a place of calm and comfort, now felt foreign and hostile. The golden light, once warm, now seemed harsh, exposing her vulnerability to every corner of the room. The soft background music did nothing to drown out the cruel amusement of the group a few tables away. Each second stretched endlessly. Inside, a storm raged, a mix of anger, sadness, and a deep ache she couldn't quite name. Pain seeped through every layer of her restraint. It wasn't just for herself, though the humiliation was real and immediate. It was for every moment she'd been forced to stay quiet in the face of subtle bias, every time her confidence had been mistaken for arrogance, every job interview where she'd felt she had to prove twice as much just to be seen as equal. The faces of her parents flashed in her mind, people who had taught her to stay dignified in the face of ignorance, to never let hate define her. But sitting there, surrounded by indifference and mockery, that lesson felt unbearably heavy. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her purse. The movement was small, but it betrayed her effort to hold herself together. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the dim background, to escape the spotlight of ridicule that seemed to follow her. Her throat tightened. Every laugh from Greg's table struck her like a reminder. In their eyes, she didn't belong here. Maya looked around again, at couples enjoying quiet dinners, at groups lost in conversation, and wondered how many of them noticed what was happening. A few glanced toward her table, their expressions uneasy, but no one intervened. The world, it seemed, preferred to look away. She took another deep breath, willing her voice not to break, willing her eyes not to fill. The ache inside her wasn't only from the humiliation, it was from the awareness that no matter how polished, composed, or successful she appeared, prejudice could still reach her. It was quiet, insidious, and always waiting in the corners of everyday life, ready to strike when least expected. And yet, beneath the pain, there was something else, a small, fragile ember of strength. It wasn't hope, not yet, but the instinct to endure, to hold her ground, to survive this moment with her dignity intact, no matter how many eyes were watching. Maya clasped her purse tighter and looked toward the restaurant entrance, her breath uneven. Somewhere deep inside, she knew this night wasn't over. Something was about to shift. The story, painful as it was, had not yet reached its turning point. The men's laughter had reached a crescendo, echoing across the softly lit room, when the restaurant doors swung open with a subtle but decisive push. A gust of cool evening air swept across the dining area, carrying with it the faint hum of the street outside. Maya's head lifted instinctively, a flicker of curiosity and tension dancing in her eyes. That's when she saw him. David Thompson entered the bistro with the calm assurance of someone who had faced chaos many times before. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his dark suit impeccably tailored, his movements precise and deliberate. There was no rush, no panic, but the quiet confidence he radiated was immediately palpable. He scanned the room, taking in the scene with a practiced eye, patrons chatting, waiters hovering uncertainly, and at one table the group whose eyes and snickers had tormented Maya for the past minutes. For a heartbeat, the air seemed to still. David's gaze locked on the harassing men, and the weight of his presence shifted the energy in the room. He did not shout. He did not approach with force. Instead, he let the gravity of his experience fill the space around him. It was a calm authority, a quiet command that demanded recognition. Greg and his companions faltered, their smirks faltering for the first time, their laughter catching in their throats. They sensed immediately. They were no longer dealing with an intimidated stranger. They were confronted by someone who would not tolerate misconduct, someone whose confidence and skill made hesitation a necessity. Maya's own eyes widened, her heart pounding not in fear, but in a sudden, undeniable relief. Her chest, heavy with tension and humiliation only moments before, felt a lightness that she hadn't realized she had been craving. David's approach was methodical, controlled, the kind of presence that suggested a plan already forming in his mind. As he slid into the booth beside her, Maya's pulse steadied. "You're safe now," he whispered, his voice low but firm, grounding her in the reality that the nightmare she had endured moments ago was shifting. The words were simple, but they carried a magnitude that reverberated through her entire being. She felt the tremor of fear and pain beginning to ebb, replaced by something fragile but powerful: hope. The men at the nearby table shifted uneasily, their laughter now replaced by a tense silence. David did not need to speak to assert control. The look in his eyes, calm but unyielding, was enough. Greg, usually so confident, now fidgeted under that scrutiny, the illusion of dominance slipping away. It was a subtle, almost imperceptible shift, but it was everything. The power dynamic had changed in an instant, and Maya felt it keenly. She was no longer alone, no longer the target of their attention. As David settled into the booth, he reached for her hand, a grounding gesture that communicated reassurance without a word. The warmth of his grip reminded Maya that she was supported, that she had an ally whose presence alone could alter the course of events. Her heart began to steady, and with it the sense of helplessness that had gripped her since the first mocking comment began to dissolve. Hope, delicate but unmistakable, began to take root. She dared to breathe more freely, to imagine a resolution where the harassment would end, where dignity could be restored. The presence of someone who could act decisively, who could navigate the tension without losing composure, gave her a sense of security she hadn't realized she had been yearning for. Around them, the restaurant seemed to respond to the change in atmosphere. Conversations resumed, softer but calmer. The men at the table, once brash and audacious, now appeared exposed, aware that the situation was no longer theirs to control. And Maya, her gaze meeting David's, felt the first true spark of optimism since the evening began. In that moment, hope was not abstract. It was tangible. It was in David's steady eyes, the quiet authority that commanded respect, the reassurance in his voice. It was the knowledge that she was no longer alone, and that justice, even in its smallest form, was now within reach. The tide had turned, and with it came the promise that the evening might yet end with her dignity intact, and the harassment confronted, fully and decisively. David's presence was commanding, but never aggressive. He did not raise his voice, nor did he need to. Every step he took toward the table of men was deliberate, each movement measured and precise, the embodiment of authority rooted in experience and calm confidence. The room, which had been heavy with tension, now seemed to still, every patron sensing the subtle shift in energy. Even the group's once confident whispers faltered under his gaze, their laughter dying in their throats. David's voice, when it came, was quiet yet firm, carrying the weight of conviction and certainty. He addressed them directly, his tone calm but unyielding. "Your behavior," he said, "is inappropriate, unacceptable, and has consequences. Harassment in a public setting like this is not only morally wrong, it is legally actionable. You are accountable for how you treat others, and the world is watching." There was no room for misinterpretation. His words were precise, factual, and deliberate. They weren't intended to intimidate with volume, but to dismantle their false sense of power. The group's bravado began to crumble, their smirks faltering as reality sank in. No one laughed, no one jeered. They shifted uneasily in their seats, muttering weak excuses. But David's calm presence absorbed each feeble attempt at deflection. Greg, the leader, clenched his jaw as his companions shuffled awkwardly. For the first time, their confidence gave way to shame, and the performance of dominance that had tormented Maya just moments ago began to collapse. Slowly they rose from their table, casting embarrassed glances toward the patrons who had quietly observed the confrontation. Their exit was measured but hurried, leaving behind the echo of what had just transpired, a scene that quietly but unmistakably declared that such behavior would not be tolerated. Maya exhaled deeply, a sound mingling relief, release, and the quiet triumph of justice restored. Her shoulders, which had been tense for what felt like hours, relaxed, and a smile, hesitant but genuine, brushed her lips. David reached for her hand across the booth, his grip firm and grounding. The warmth of his presence, the steady reassurance in his touch, made the ordeal feel distant, as though it had been a storm passing through a once peaceful night. The weight of the moment began to settle, leaving behind a clarity that was both profound and humbling. This confrontation had ended without violence, without spectacle, yet the impact was undeniable. It was a testament to the power of measured courage, of standing with dignity and authority when faced with cruelty. Maya felt a deep, resonant sense of validation, not just for herself, but for every moment in her life when she had had to endure subtle and overt acts of injustice. The evening had reaffirmed that injustice could be confronted, and that standing up for what was right could restore balance, even in the most difficult circumstances. As they gathered their belongings and moved toward the restaurant's exit, Maya glanced around the dining room. Conversations had resumed, softer now, tinged with a quiet awareness that kindness and civility had prevailed. She felt not only relief, but an awakening inspiration, a renewed belief in the strength of resilience, in the ability to face adversity with composure, and in the profound impact of support, love, and unwavering moral conviction. David held her hand as they stepped into the evening air, and for the first time since she had arrived, Maya allowed herself to breathe freely. The cool breeze against her skin seemed symbolic, carrying away the tension and humiliation, leaving only the clarity of triumph and the quiet radiance of hope. In that moment, she realized that courage did not always need to roar. Sometimes it spoke softly, but carried the certainty of action. Sometimes it was simply being present, standing firm, and refusing to let cruelty define the story. Maya's heart swelled with admiration for her husband, but also for herself, for enduring, for holding on, and for allowing justice to manifest in its quiet but unyielding form. The night air embraced them as they walked together, the glow of city lights reflecting off the pavement. Maya felt a profound inspiration, the knowledge that resilience, dignity, and love could create change, that courage, even in small doses, could alter the course of events, and that standing for what was right, even in a world filled with indifference, would always matter.